In an earlier video, we briefly went over origin points, and the origin point is the little orange dot in the center of the object. And what this dot is the location of which our objects will snap to things, they will scale, rotate around, and pretty much focus around. So I'm going to right-click my mouse over here to move my 3D cursor so we can see the origin point of this cube here. And if I were to just click on it and drag it and move it over here and then click to confirm and drop it, then we can see it a little better. So right now the origin point is in the center of this cube. So if I press R to rotate, the cube will rotate around that origin point. I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. But as we also discussed in another video, you can very easily change the origin point of an object by holding Alt and double right clicking on a part of the object where you would like the origin point to be. So say I want it right at this point here, I could hold Alt and double right click here, and the origin point will snap to that corner there. So if I press R to rotate, it's now going to move around that point. If I press S to scale, it's going to scale around that origin point. So if I wanted the origin point to be back at the center, I could press T to bring up my tool shelf, and under here where it says set origin, I could select origin to object, and then the origin will go back to the center of the object. You'll also notice there's the option here to put the origin to the cursor. So say we right clicked our cursor and put it over here somewhere, we could under set origin put origin to cursor. And so now if I were to press R to rotate, S to scale, it would all be going around this point. Let me right click and move that 3D cursor away so that you understand that this is scaling around this origin point and not wherever the cursor happened to be. So this option is just to set the origin point to that cursor, and then once you do that, it's fixed at that location. So I'm going to press origin to object, and then I'm going to press reset selected, which reset selected just resets your object's rotation values. For instance, under transform here, say we have this object rotated in some kind of crazy way, and we could either do that manually here, or of course we were just tapping R and rotated. You see those values change as I do that. So this is just a quick way to reset all of that back to 0. So that's what that's for. Individual objects have these origin points, but whenever we're dealing with these kind of transform operations such as rotating, scaling, and moving, and etc., then we have another dynamic going on that we have to worry about. So if I press D to duplicate this cube a few times, and then tap A to select all of these objects here. Right now, if I were to press R to rotate, you see this imaginary line, which with the little rotation symbol where my mouse is moving, goes to the center of all of these selected objects. And this has to do with our pivot point. So the pivot point is kind of similar to the origin point, but it's typically referring to how should we treat multiple selections rather than the single origin point of each object. So the first one we have here is active element. Down here you'll see that all these cubes are selected here in our outliner, but the only one in orange is this cube 0.003, and that's because this is our active object. With this set to active element, whichever one of these objects are our active object, when we go to rotate, scale, etc., those operations will center around that active object. So if under display I were to press all names real quick, we can see that this is the active object here. So now when we press R to rotate, the transformations are all happening around this cube 0.003. Of course, you can change the active object by just shift selecting something else. So say I wanted it to be this cube, I would just shift select this cube, and now that cube has become the active object. If I were to shift select it again, it would deselect it. Moving down the line, we have medium point, which medium point is the one you should usually keep this on and the one it's set to by default. And that's because that's just the imaginary center of all selected objects. So if I were to press R to rotate, we see that that is the center point, but say I were to double right click over here and add a monkey or something, and then tap A to select everything. This time when I press R to rotate, it's going to figure out the center between all selected objects. So we press R to rotate, it's moved a distance from there. Under this we have individual origins. When we have the pivot type set to individual origins, Blender then treats each transformation going on as an individual affair with each one of these objects. So if I press R to rotate, they'll all rotate around their own origin points. S to scale, they all scale around their own origin points, and so on. Moving down the line, we have 3D cursor. This will focus around wherever the 3D cursor is. So if we say we right click and move the 3D cursor over here, we press R to rotate, it's going to rotate around that, S to scale, and so on. And I think you get the picture. So bounding box center, this is referring to if an imaginary box were to encompass everything from all sides, what would be the center of that box? And so that is the pivot point. Of course, all of these methods work when we're in edit mode as well. So if I were to click on this and press tab to go into edit mode here, and I'll just select some random faces on here, holding shift. And so we have similar type control here. So if this were set to individual origins here and I press S to scale, you see that all of these faces are scaling around their individual origin points of each of those faces. But if I were to change this to medium point and press S to scale, you see they all scale together towards this imaginary center. So, pretty similar stuff going on there as well. So real quick, I'm going to press tab to go back into object mode. You may have noticed this little cube icon here. And what this does is it will snap any object to the location of the cursor. So say I right click and put the cursor here and then select this cube here and I press this button, it will then move the cube to that location. Now, when we combine this with the ability to alt right click on an object to get the 3D cursor to snap to any part of that object we want, we have a really powerful system. So say I wanted this cube to sit exactly on top of the head of this monkey, but I didn't want to have to sit there and press 1 to go into front view and try to align everything perfectly and move around to different views and sit there for way too long trying to get this to work. All I do is hold Alt and right click to set my cursor to snap to this point here on this monkey head, and then click on the cube and then press this button here, and that will move that object directly to where the 3D cursor is. I'll press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain. And so if I wanted this to sit directly flat on there, first I could press reset selected, which will reset the rotation of that. Then I could Alt double right click this cube's origin point to get it to move to the bottom of the cube there, and then Alt right click on the top of this monkey head, then press this button here, and the cube snaps directly to the top. And this really removes a lot of guesswork, a lot of sitting there and fooling around and fidgeting with things. So becoming really efficient with these options and these buttons and learning how to really use these pivot points well. Spend a lot of time trying to master that and get used to that, because it will save you in the long run hours and hours of unnecessary work of trying to position things and get them set up just right, rather than set them up perfectly when we use these tools.